Hola a todos que se van conectando, perdón. ¿Me pueden decir si está bien el audio? ¿No me escuchan robótico? Ya veo que aquí está llegando Brandon. Déjenme le mando invitación. Ya se la mandé. Mientras díganme si todo bien, porfas.
Heyo,
Hey, how you are?
doing well. How are you?
Well, a little nervous to be sincere, but here we are. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this. I'm really thankful with you.
Yeah, no worries. It's kind of fun. I've only done one other Instagram live, so I was like, why not? Let's have some fun.
I think it was fairly recent. I think I watched a little bit of that one.
Yeah, it's hard because like if you because it's in the platform, if you go real
Sure.
long and people aren't like super interested, they tend to not watch it or so it's a little bit more difficult. But I think it's cool.
Yeah, and there's always the connection issues, and several times I have this couple of guests, and then Instagram tells you, "Oh, you have 5 seconds left," and then you have to you have to say, "Oh, there's only 5 seconds. Thank you very much. See you later." Things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's
But
okay. I don't mind that.
but anyway, what I was thinking about we can make this work is based on the topics I wrote for you. Maybe I can ask you specific questions, then you can give your answer, and then I translate it for our listeners.
Yeah, that works. That
Do you
that's
think that'll work?
yeah, no problem at all. And you can like if you want to modify them a little bit, and
Sure,
make them
sure,
a little
sure.
shorter and stuff, you do whatever you need.
Very well. Los que están en línea, ¿nos pueden decir si escuchan bien a Brandon y a mí también? ¿Todo bien con el audio, con el video? Para poder comenzar. Y lo que le estaba preguntando a Brandon es yo hacerle algunas preguntitas de acuerdo a un temario que armamos entre él y yo y ya traducir sus respuestas para que nos puedan entender a ambos. ¿Sale? ¿Les late? Okay, they seem to agree. So without further ado, I don't want to abuse your time. So the topic we're going to talk about a little bit today is key nutritional variables for muscle hypertrophy. Maybe this can seem a little bit too simplistic, like, I want to get big. So let me just eat whatever. Let me eat it all.
Yeah,
But it's a little bit more nuanced than that because depending on how we measure our progress, how much we're eating in a surplus, if it's actually needed a surplus, it can get a little more tricky than that.
yeah, for sure. I think everybody has one phase that's just like a dirty bulk, and they kind of learn from there.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a couple on accident, so
Very well, Brandon. First of all, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself for the people that don't know you, which I think it's no one, but anyway, please.
yeah. So just kind of briefly, so I am a kind of researcher and content creator more recently. And I study muscle hypertrophy and nutrition, sports nutrition. And my goal is to kind of figure out how we can maximize hypertrophy and and do that in the easiest way possible. So right now, I am CSO of Tailored Coaching Method. So
Sure.
I teach their trainers basically and do a lot of education stuff. But that's probably all the main stuff.
And you yourself are a natural bodybuilder?
Yeah. Oh, that too. I haven't competed for a year, but I don't miss it.
I,
Don't miss it.
I, I can picture why.
Yeah.
Le preguntaba a Brandon que nos diera una pequeña introducción para todos nosotros y bueno, él nos comenta que es investigador. Brandon tiene varios papers publicados. El último que publicó, bueno, eso yo se los estoy agregando un poquito, es sobre la hipertrofia sarcoplásmica. Ustedes pueden encontrar todo el trabajo de Brandon en ResearchGate. Tiene poco más de 20 papers publicados y también es coach, no sé si conozcan por ahí The Strength Guys, él trabaja ahí, y también es físico-culturista natural, así que tiene experiencia tanto práctica como teórica, ¿sale? Y bueno, sin más, well, let us get into the topic, if you will.
Yeah.
So first of all, what I would like to establish before we can talk about minutia and details is, okay, so our main goal is to grow muscle. So in terms of nutrition, what we would think fairly simplistic is that we need to eat more. But if that's really the case, do we really need a caloric surplus?
Yeah, so most of the time when I talk to people, I say try not to do it. So no, you don't need one. If you're a beginner, you don't need one. If you're an intermediate, you probably need a little bit of one. But as you get more advanced, you need a surplus more, if that makes sense. So, if you've just started training, you can get away without a surplus.
Brandon nos comenta de inicio, si un superávit calórico, si nuestro objetivo es ganar masa muscular, le pregunto si es necesario. Y lo que Brandon nos aconseja es que si eres principiante, probablemente no. Probablemente según vayas avanzando en tu carrera, en tu entrenamiento, en tu experiencia, quizás se vuelva más necesario, pero él comenta que no es indispensable, ok, quiero ponerme grande y necesitas comer como bestia, vaya, él comenta que no comenzaría de esta manera. All right, so how can we best establish, based on our training status, if we are untrained or trained, how can we make the best call if we actually need a caloric surplus? How big, how little? What would be your basic key points to making decisions about that?
Yeah, so if you started training and you've been training for like 2 or 3 years and you've stopped progressing quickly, like your weights, like your strength, once it kind of plateaus, once you hit your second or third plateau in weights, that's when you would say, okay, I've been doing this for 3 years and I'm doing it right. I'm, sticking to the guidelines, whatever the hypertrophy guidelines are at the time. And I'm not really improving over a course of 3 to 4 months. Then you would say, okay, well, I need to make sure that I'm in a surplus.
Nos comenta que básicamente cuando nos encontramos con una meseta, un punto de estancamiento donde ya no estamos progresando, pudiera ser en nuestro rendimiento en el gimnasio, qué tanta fuerza estamos ganando, cómo nos estamos desempeñando, es donde nos haríamos la pregunta si efectivamente estamos en un superávit calórico. Very well. So let's say we hit that plateau. So I'm not growing, I feel miserable, I have no muscles, nobody loves me, things like that.
Yeah.
How would be the best starting point in terms of, well, first, how much of a surplus is actually required? Mm-hmm. And how can we calculate it? Could it be percentage of our caloric needs? Could it be rate of weight gain? What would be the best approach in your opinion?
So I kind of come from the mindset that the longer you can stay in a surplus, the better. So, if you start with 200 or 250 calories, you can probably stay in a surplus longer before you're uncomfortable with it or before you need to cut or whatever, stops you. So that's usually, 10% or so, 10 to 15%. And if you're one of those people who can eat a lot, right, maybe you go all the way up to like 20%. So 10 to 20%, somewhere in that range is what I usually tell people.
Would you make a difference in trained or untrained people, continuing with that very same question?
Yeah, I think, if you're going to kind of maximize your gains as an untrained lifter, you could probably push higher. So you could go more like 25%. If you're somewhat lean, like if you're starting out overweight, like pretty overweight, you probably don't want to start as high just because you're gonna put on fat. And most people aren't comfortable with putting on that much fat. So that's kind of the main difference is, yeah, you should do more if you're a beginner, if you're in their first 3 years, but most people aren't super comfortable with that. So that's when we kind of dial it back.
Very well. Brandon nos comenta ok, si vamos a realizar efectivamente un superávit energético, ¿cuánto sería ideal en términos de calorías, en términos de porcentaje o de tasa de ganancia? Y él nos comenta que un comienzo sensato sería más o menos 10, 15, 20% de superávit energético Y después lo que le preguntaba es si eso sería diferente para una persona entrenada o no entrenada. Y comenta que en una persona entrenada sería sensato más bien mantenernos en el rango inferior. Y en una persona novata en el entrenamiento pudiéramos empujarlo quizás 20, 25%, también dependiendo de cómo vamos ganando. Y algo que nos comenta también es que no sería cómodo para la misma persona si empezó con un sobrepeso, quizás, hablando de grasa corporal, seguir consumiendo más calorías, porque no sería cómodo en términos de composición o quizás de estética para esta persona. Okay, so the next point I have in my little word here is about the P ratio. Could you give us a little definition to really comprehend what we're talking about when we mention P ratio? What is it really?
Yeah. In kind of probably 50 or 60 years ago, it was established that you gain a certain percentage of lean mass and fat mass to make up the weight you gain, right? So if you gain 10 pounds, it would normally be about 40% muscle and 60% fat if you weren't exercising. So that's just if you're eating, right? So that's the basics of it. And it's always been this kind of interesting topic because if you can shift that ratio, then you can have an advantage, right? But we don't really have many training studies with P ratio data.
Le pregunto a Brandon sobre el P ratio, por si alguien de ustedes que están conectados lo había escuchado. El partitioning ratio, P ratio, básicamente se refiere a qué porcentaje estaríamos ganando de qué tejido. Si empezamos a sobrealimentarnos, qué tanto estaría ganando de masa muscular, qué tanto estaría ganando de grasa. Y algo de las dificultades que nos comenta Brandon es que realmente no ha habido estudios en personas entrenadas que evalúen efectivamente el P ratio. Entonces, eso es como una limitante cuando empezamos a revisar la investigación. So, in regards to the P ratio, how can we make advantage? How can we take advantage of that? And if that would be related with our initial body fat. So, let's say we start our bulking phase a little bit more lean, or if we can push it to certain levels of body fat and still get a good P ratio.
Yeah. You would think that if you started leaner, you could gain more weight and you would probably gain more muscle. So your P ratio would be better. Um, and that's kind of true. But we don't know where the limit is. So I can't say once you hit 20% body fat, your P ratio goes down. Like I can't say that. I can say it's probably better if you're between 13 and 17% fat, like I would guess. But this goes back to how much fat are you willing to gain? Because really, we don't know how it changes with training, right? And everybody who's trying to maximize muscles is training quite a lot. So, it's hard to say, but you definitely want to be training and you definitely want to eat lots of protein. So those are your two things that are going to shift it a little bit.
Nos comenta Brandon cómo pudiéramos maximizar o tomar ventaja del P ratio. Y básicamente no es algo que sepamos a ciencia cierta. No, nos comenta que él no está seguro si pudiéramos comenzar con un 13% de grasa, un 16% de grasa, y que eso se traduzca en que vas a ganar más masa muscular. O tampoco que uno pudiera pensar que comenzando más magros, comenzando con menos grasa corporal, significaría un mejor P ratio, pero no es así. Lo que nos comenta es que tampoco estamos seguros de qué tanto cambia el P ratio dependiendo del entrenamiento. Y algo que sí nos aconseja es el consumo de proteína. Serían como que básicamente de las variables importantes para tratar de maximizar y aprovechar toda esta cuestión del P ratio. Okay, so in regards to protein, that's actually the next thing I have in my little notations. Protein needs under a hypercaloric condition. How much will it shift because you're consuming more calories? So you would assume muscle protein synthesis rates are higher. So we actually need less protein. And how much would that less protein be? Or if we need to go higher to maximize the P ratio?
Yeah. So muscle protein synthesis kind of tops out at what we think like 50 grams of protein. So that's what, no matter like what the case is, you have 50 grams of protein and your MPS is way up. So you're good. Now, when we think about more long-term, right, there's a meta-analysis that a lot of people have seen. So, and it basically says you need 1.8 grams per kilogram to maximize resisting training adaptations. So I would say the very minimum is 1.8. Now, in that study, they have confidence intervals. And so the upper end is about 2.2 grams per kilogram, which is, a gram per pound. So I would say if you're smart, you'll eat at least 2.2 grams per kilogram. Now, beyond that, there's a series of studies that suggest if you're in a surplus and your surplus is mainly protein, so now you're getting up into 3 grams per kilogram and sometimes even 3.5 or 4, you can make your P ratio even better and gain mostly muscle mass from that extra protein. So that's kind of what I tell people is 2.2 is a very safe number, but if you're really trying to get every last little inch, go ahead and push it up to 3 grams per kilogram, somewhere between 2 and 3, I think that's pretty fair.
Sure. Nos comenta Brandon, estamos hablando de qué tanto incrementaría la necesidad de proteínas en una fase hipercalórica. Dice que como mínimo, de acuerdo a la información metaanalítica, estaríamos buscando un consumo de 1.8 gramos por kilogramo, como mínimo, pero lo que sugeriría, con base a los intervalos de confianza de este mismo metaanálisis, estaríamos hablando de 2.2 gramos, que son 1 gramo por libra, que es lo que nos encontramos de recomendaciones continuas. E incluso se ha observado que personas que incrementan más el consumo proteico, rondando superior a 2 gramos, quizás llegando a 3 gramos, eso sería útil si quisiéramos como que sacarle el máximo provecho a una fase de ganancia y no dejar nada de ganancia sobre la mesa. Entonces, la recomendación punto de partida sería lo que nos comenta Brandon, 2.2 gramos para comenzar. Mínimo 1.8 gramos. I think I recall the Jose Antonio study where they give people like 4 point something grams of protein and they actually lost a little bit of body fat, and it was an odd study if I'm completely honest with you. Do you think we need to go that far in regards to protein consumption?
I don't think you need to go that high. I think what happened in that study is imagine, because he gave him shakes, right? Sure. Imagine you drinking 4 protein shakes per day, and imagine how full you would be, right? So that's going to kind of change the other things you eat. And he was just really focused on protein. So the nutrition data in there is kind of like, it's not super, super awesome. But, if you're really hardcore, you could try it. I have never gone that high. I think I stick right around 2.5. That's my kind of sweet spot, 2.5 grams per kilogram. But it's very rare that somebody can handle that much protein.
No pain, no gain, all the proteins. You want to get all the trophies, all the hypertrophies.
Yeah, not worth the plastic.
Le comentaba a Brandon, posiblemente algunos que están en línea de ustedes que estén familiarizados, con un estudio de José Antonio, en el cual les daban, Felipe, ¿cómo estás? A lo mejor tú te acuerdas. Les daban 4 y punto tantos gramos de proteína y le pregunté a Brandon si realmente ir a ese extremo pudiera suponer algún beneficio, algún extra en términos de ganancia de masa muscular. Y en ese estudio lo que nos comenta Brandon es que les dieron shakes de proteína y que habría que ver cómo está repercutiendo esos shakes de proteína, cómo están haciéndote sentir, y probablemente te van a hacer sentir más lleno. Entonces eso va a repercutir en la ingesta de otros nutrientes. So, moving on from protein, we already established, okay, let's go with a 10% caloric surplus, but okay, we set our protein at 2.2 grams. It's all sweet, it's all good. But what do we do with the other macronutrients? What do we do with carbohydrates? What do we do with fats? Is it the same if I just increase carbohydrates, if I just increase fats? Would that be a different hypertrophic response?
So, short answer is no. There's not enough data to say, you really want to increase, only carbs or only fat. But when you look at the kind of off-target effects, the effects that aren't necessarily just muscle growth. When you increase carbs, you see this effect of moving more. Like people just, they move, they have higher NEAT, right? And so that's good. That's just good in general. So that's why I tend to say, once you hit, a gram per kilogram of fat, so you're in a safe range, you're getting a good amount of fat, and you can handle more food, kind of dump it into carbs, just because there's a chance it works out better. Now that's like a couple studies, so that's me kind of speculating a bit, but I mean, I also enjoy carbs, so that's a little more of my bias too.
I think we all do. I think we all do. To a certain extent, because when you're handling 400 grams of carbohydrates, it's also like, I don't want to do this anymore.
That's true. That's very true. And I've coached people who have eaten, they're up in the 4 to 5,000 calorie range, and like you have to push up their fat because they can't have 800 carbs. They would just be bloated and full and feel miserable. So it's once you hit, a certain number, you got to push up the fat. It's just like if you're in a 250 calorie surplus and your protein's good, it's like, okay, well that's not that many carbs. I can deal with it. But then it kind of just depends on how much of a surplus you're wanting to go into.
Depends on how badly you want to win that contest, that plastic trophy.
Yeah.
Le comentaba a Brandon, ok, si ya establecimos que necesitamos un superávit calórico 10% por decir algo, ya estamos consumiendo 2.2 gramos de proteínas. ¿Qué pasa con los otros dos macronutrientes? ¿Qué pasa con carbohidratos? ¿Qué pasa con lípidos? Sería igual si yo llego a mis calorías a partir de carbohidratos o a partir de lípidos, y Brandon la respuesta corta que nos da es que no sería lo mismo. En donde él establecería un punto de partida respecto a lípidos, sería 1 gramo por kilogramo. Entonces, si pesas 70 kilos, 70 gramos de lípidos, y a partir de ahí carbohidratos. Y después le comentaba de cuando una dieta es demasiado alta en carbohidratos, también ya se empieza a volver problemático, de que, por ejemplo, si alguien por ahí de los que están en línea tiene ingestas de 300, 400, 500 gramos de carbohidratos, pues te vas a sentir inflamado todo el tiempo y va a ser bastante incómodo. Así que también nos aconseja que cuando ese es el caso, cuando las ingestas ya son muy elevadas de carbohidratos e incómodas para la persona, también sería sensato empezar a incrementar el consumo de lípidos. Okay, so I think we already have a solid starting point. We have our caloric surplus, let's say 10, 15, 20%, depending on our training status. Then we need to calculate our protein needs, let's say 2.2 or the almighty 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Mm-hmm. Then at least 1 gram of fats per kilogram. And then carbohydrates, we can kind of modulate in regards to how are we feeling or training and other variables. And then how would our intake would actually be like? And that's the next thing I want to talk with you about nutrient timing, specifically about protein. Do we really need to partition it in a certain manner? Does it really matter? Or can we play more with that in regards to our personal preference or maybe your job or occupations? What would be your opinion in regards to that?
Yeah. I think if you can split that protein over 4 meals, it's probably ideal. So you want to have one right when you wake up, 2 across the day spread out, and then 1 before you go to sleep. If that's not ideal, 3 and 4 is probably not that much different. 4 and 5 is probably not that much different. But when you get into the low numbers, so like 2, so if you try to just intake your protein over 2 meals, that probably isn't the best idea. So I generally say go for 4 or 5. If you can't get it, that's okay. But remember that you want protein around your workout, because if there's a benefit, it's very small, but you want to take it because it's easy, right? It's like easy money. Sure. You're like, bam, got it. And then you want a big protein bolus before you go to sleep, because you're going to sleep for 8 hours or 7 hours or whatever you're going to sleep for. So those are the 2 kind of main factors where I'm like, this is where you really, really need your protein. And I'd prefer you do it, over 4 or 5 meals a day. But everybody can't do that. Sometimes it's 3.
Sure. And before I translate
Yeah.
this one, in regards to the pre-bed protein, would it actually necessary to take a casein shake? Would it be good if I just eat some steak, some whey protein? Does it really make an important difference?
I think a mixed meal, so some kind of meat with some carbs to kind of slow down your digestion, and a bigger protein hit, maybe like 40 to 50 grams. So it's digesting as you're sleeping. Now, I think there's only like one study on that, and there were some other issues with that study, but I mean, it kind of just makes sense if you even look at the old bodybuilders, right? So that's the only time you're not eating. And if we can maximize anything in that period, let's take it.
Would you agree to wake up at 4 a.m. to have a protein
No,
shake?
no, nope. I'm not waking up. That's my limit. I'm not. I've done it like twice in my life when I was, new to training and science and stuff. But no, you don't need to wake up in the middle of the night, especially if you're having that big meal before bed. Then we're
Sure.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to leave any gains under the table, right?
Oh man, just hook up
I
an IV and just right here all night.
get it straight in my veins and there you go.
Yeah.
Comentábamos con Brandon respecto al timing, específicamente de las proteínas. Si es necesario hacer como estar partiendo nuestras ingestas y nos comenta que sería sensato hacer al menos 4 ingestas. Un desayuno, tu comida después de entrenar y tu cena. Y nos comenta que los puntos más importantes para el consumo de proteínas serían después de entrenar y también antes de dormir. Y en relación al tipo de proteína antes de dormir, le preguntaba si es necesario que hagamos una inversión, por ejemplo, en caseína, en proteínas de absorción lenta, y comenta que no realmente. Lo que pudiéramos hacer sería una comida mixta, por ejemplo, un bistec con papas, y ya eso quizás retardaría un poquito el vaciamiento gástrico y con eso retardaría todos los procesos digestivos para estar maximizando estos procesos de síntesis proteica a lo largo de la noche, porque estaríamos hablando de más o menos 8 horas. Y también le preguntaba por si alguien de ustedes ha escuchado de algunos culturistas que se levantan a las 4 de la mañana a tomarse un shake, si es algo que deberíamos hacer, y comenta que no, que prefiere que se lo inyecten directo en las venas y con eso vamos a obtener todas nuestras ganancias. Very well. So far, it really seems very simple. When we want to gain muscle, we just need to focus on certain amount of calories, or protein, of course, to partition that protein at least 4 meals, 3 to 4 meals, if I remember correctly, on the off-season recommendations from Helms.
Mm-hmm.
And then the type of protein, as long as it's quality protein, I don't think you need to, or do you think we can benefit from acquiring certain supplements like casein? You already said not, but maybe whey protein. Do you think this is a variable that we need to pay attention to? Like, let's say after training, I need my whey protein because it's fast absorbing. Do you really think we need to do that?
I don't think so. There was a lot of back and forth in the literature like 5 or 6 years ago and dating back even further. But as long as you're getting a good 40, 35, 45 grams around your workout, you're probably going to be okay. So what I like to do is I like to have, a protein bar an hour before my workout, and then a protein shake with some fruit like an hour after my workout. Just, to cover my bases and be like, okay, well, if there's no benefit, that's fine because I'm getting my protein, and if there's a benefit, I'm definitely getting it. So that's kind of how I approach things. I don't think there's enough evidence to say yes, you must have it right after your workout or right before. It's just something that we can kind of use to our advantage.
Maybe a shake is a little bit more practical. Let's say you finish your training, you gotta go to work, you can take a shake, add some fruit, and there you go. Not because the whey protein per se, it's like the key to maximum gain.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we have to be practical because people don't do this. I mean, there are a few pro bodybuilders and whatnot, but most people aren't pro.
And we often assume everybody wants to be a bodybuilder,
Yeah.
but nobody want to lift no heaviest weight.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Here we go. Vale, le preguntaba a Brandon respecto al tipo de proteína que pudiéramos consumir. Si es necesario, por ejemplo, consumir suero de leche que se absorbe rápidamente después de entrenar. Y nos comenta que no, en realidad no, pero sí puede ser práctico porque no todas las personas quieren ser fisicoculturistas de alto nivel. Entonces, por ejemplo, si terminaste de entrenar y tienes que ir a tu trabajo, pudiera ser sensato consumir un licuado con una fruta y no tanto por el beneficio adicional que pudiera tener la proteína de suero de leche, sino por la practicidad. Very well. So, I think one of the, at least for me, the most difficult aspects of all the of acquiring all trophies is measuring if I'm actually gaining muscle. Because if I weigh myself, let's say every week, there are a lot of things that can go odd with my body weight. If I do it in the morning, if I do it after training, before training, if I drink water, if I go to the bathroom, if I do it, it can be a crazy case. So how can we start to best assess our progress?
I think this is one of the hardest things to do because we don't have, DEXAs, we don't have ultrasounds, right? I can't walk into a lab and I could use them, but they're not even that accurate for one person. So what I do is I track my weight I was tracking when I cared. I was tracking my weight every morning, right? Right when you wake up, you can do it as many days a week as you can, and you get a good data set. You can take pictures monthly, like just either flexing pictures or standing or whatever. Just make sure it's like exactly the same, like same time of day, same lighting, same, clothes if you can. You can take measurements. So like you could take bicep measurements because, everybody wants big arms and you don't put much fat around your arms or your calves maybe. So you could take select measurements and look at that. So I think a combination of different things is really needed to see. And then also, your training, right? If you're growing in strength, you can kind of assume that you're growing some muscle at least. So those kind of four things is what I do.
La siguiente pregunta que le hice a Brandon fue, al menos para mí, una de las partes más difíciles de todo este proceso es cómo cuantificar que efectivamente estamos ganando masa muscular. Y nos comenta que sí, efectivamente lo podemos hacer con el peso, pero estandarizando nuestros procesos, siempre pesándonos a la misma hora, en las mismas condiciones. También podemos tomar circunferencia, por ejemplo, del bíceps, porque dice que todo el mundo queremos bíceps más grandes, y pues es correcto. Y porque tenemos poca adiposidad en el bíceps. También lo que podemos hacer es tomar fotografías, también en la misma condición, la misma luz, la misma ropa, la misma hora. Y otra cosa que podemos hacer es monitorear nuestro rendimiento en el gimnasio, si nos estamos haciendo más fuertes, por ejemplo. But in regards to our performance in the gym, for me, it gets a little bit complicated because let's say we are getting stronger. But how can we assume that strength increase is actually hypertrophy and not because my nervous system is getting better at lifting weights? How can I separate those two to make better calls in regards to, do I keep my calories the same? Do I play with it a little bit? How can you approach that situation?
So the way you stay away from nervous system adaptations is you just don't do low reps, right? Like, so maybe you have low reps in your training, but I'm really looking for that improvement in the, say, 6 to 12 rep range. So that kind of narrows your window. Now, you can do, as we know from progressive overload, you can do a few more reps, and maybe you got a little stronger, a little more muscle. You can do more weight. So, when you're intermediate and above, it's not going to be a whole lot. It's going to be like 2 pounds or 5 pounds per like 3 or 4 months, right? So it's not going to happen all over either. So it may just be, your lat pull down went up 5 pounds in the last 8 weeks. Everything else stayed the same, because you were doing a little bit extra lats, and you could say, okay, that was probably muscle gain over time. But short gains, you know, less than 8 weeks, I would say, are probably more neural than anything.
Ok. Le preguntaba a Brandon en relación a nuestro progreso en el gimnasio, que se vuelve un poquito complicado, porque, por ejemplo, si estamos monitoreando los incrementos de fuerza, ¿cómo pudiéramos saber que esos incrementos de fuerza no se deben por adaptaciones del sistema nervioso, de que mi sistema nervioso es más, está más adaptado, vaya, para cargar pesos pesados? Y Brandon responde que manteniéndonos alejados de las bajas repeticiones, más o menos en un rango de 6 a 12 reps, y si estoy progresando en un lat pull down que incremente 5 libras, que a lo mejor estoy haciendo más repeticiones, de esta manera pudiéramos estar separando estas adaptaciones neurológicas de las adaptaciones musculares, porque las segundas, las ganancias de hipertrofia, son las que estamos buscando, y eso es algo que ya en la práctica sí se vuelve un poquito difícil. Por cierto, váyanos dejando algunas preguntitas para ahorita al final hacérselas a Brandon, por favor, con toda confianza. Very well. So I think that covers most of it. Maybe when it gets tricky in regards to measuring hypertrophy, is not really in practice in the real world, but mostly in scientific studies. Because when they measure hypertrophy with, let's say, bioelectrical impedance, it's like, why they do that, you know? But then if
Yeah.
you see muscle biopsies, if you see DEXA scan, I think that can give us a little broader picture. But my point here is that maybe we don't really need to go that far to actually measure how are we progressing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think being patient, you know, when you look at pictures, people like to look at them every month or every 2 months. But the biggest differences you can tell, like if you took a picture of me in my 2016 competition and my 2019 competition, that's 3 years difference. It's like night and day. Like I put on probably like 6 pounds of muscle, which is not much in 3 years, but on stage it was a ton. So, you know, be patient. And that's why you have those pictures. You can go year to year and then feel good and be like, I'm doing it rather than month to month and be like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing it.
But if I want to gain muscle week to week, if that's not possible, I'm already doomed.
I mean, you can use some drugs and you could probably get there.
There's always a catch.
Yeah, yeah.
Le comentaba a Brandon que en los estudios científicos es donde realmente sí se necesita más especificidad con las mediciones de hipertrofia. Si por ejemplo, encontráramos estudios que utilizan bioimpedancia, a lo mejor ya no sería tan confiable. Y no, nosotros en la práctica no es que tampoco necesitemos ir a un extremo de sacar biopsias, de buscar un DEXA scan, y lo que nos comenta Brandon es que necesitamos ser pacientes, y en lugar de compararnos mes con mes, para algunos puede sonar así como que un poquito fatalista, pero sería mejor compararnos año con año. Él comenta que en un periodo de 3 años, él ganó 6 libras de masa muscular, que pueden parecer poco, pero en el escenario, en la competencia, sí es una diferencia grande. So I think the final takeaways, before if you have time, we can answer a couple of questions that we have here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. How can we set up our whole diet?
Yeah. So
Basically.
So you're going to basically want 2.2 grams per kilogram or more, preferably a little more, of protein. You're going to want at least a gram per kilogram of fat, and then the rest can be carbs. If you need to go a little bit higher on fat, you can. Then you're probably going to keep your surplus. For most people listening, I'm going to guess they're not beginners. Somewhere between 250 calories and we'll say 500 calories, or 10 to 15, maybe 20% max. And then you're going to want to just be very patient and be okay with putting on fat, and really just take your time spending time training in a surplus for as long as you can until you feel like you need to cut, because we don't have a great cutoff for that.
Sure. De los puntos finales, así como recomendaciones, antes de pasar algunas preguntitas, insisto, hagan sus preguntas, aprovechen que está Brandon, de verdad es un auténtico crack. Nos recomienda comenzar con el consumo de 2.2 gramos de proteínas, si se puede más, está correcto, es algo que aconseja, al menos 1 gramo de lípidos, y a partir de ahí modular nuestros carbohidratos mientras cumplamos con alrededor de 10-20% de superávit energético, que también pudiera traducirse como 250, 500 calorías. Y a partir de ahí ser sumamente pacientes porque pues es un proceso lento, vaya, que nos va a tomar tiempo y no pudiéramos estarlo evaluando semana a semana, como les comentaba. Más bien es algo que veríamos año con año, qué tanto hemos ganado y tratar de pasar el máximo tiempo posible en un superávit energético. Very well, Brandon. So I don't want to abuse your time. I know you have to leave in 15 minutes, more or less. So we have a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
The first one is in regards to the opposite, which is fat loss.
Yeah.
uh, if you're losing more and more body fat, how viable would it be to increase your protein intake to, here it says 2.4 to 2.5 grams per kilogram? Would you really need to go higher and higher as you lose more body fat?
Potentially. I think there's a couple studies that indicate if you can get up into the, and I think we wrote this in our article for physique athletes, if you can get up to like 3 grams per kilogram, like 2.5 to 3, the chance of you losing muscle are less likely. But you have to take into account at that point, depending on how low you go, the amount of uh, carbohydrates you're giving up and how it affects your training. So there's kind of like a trade-off, right? So if you're at
Sure.
1.8 grams per kilogram and you can sneak into like 2.5 and it doesn't affect anything, cool. But then if you go above it, your training drops off or something, then you're like, okay, well, let me back up to 2.5. But nobody has ever done like a dose response study with protein to say, 2 is better than 1 and 3, and so, you know what I mean? So
It's always that issue with research. It's really hard to study this population specific, the bodybuilders, because bodybuilders, they don't want to be messed up with like, how can you alter my training, my nutrition? And you've been involved in the actual process. I'm just speculating. But financing, not everybody wants to give money to this kind of research. Do you think that's a limitation in your field?
I think so. I think it's come a long way. And hopefully, the more people that get into exercise, the more people we have kind of in the physique-esque world. Because a lot of our data is actually not from physique athletes at all. It's from like sport athletes. So
Sure.
that's a problem because like me and you, I mean, I play soccer occasionally, but um, I'm not training like a football player or a basketball player or whatever. I'm going to the gym. I'm doing cardio, so I feel good, and that's about it. So I'm not an athlete in the sport term. I'm a physique athlete. So it's hard, especially for physique athlete research.
Sure. De la pregunta de que si estamos perdiendo más y más grasa corporal, ¿qué tanto aumentar las proteínas? No es algo que pudiéramos decir de manera concluyente, sí, vete hasta tantos gramos, porque tienes que considerar qué tanto vas a desplazar los otros macronutrientes, especialmente los carbohidratos, y eso pudiera tener un impacto sobre el entrenamiento. Y después estuvimos comentando un poquito de cómo la gran parte de la investigación es muy difícil hacerla tal cual en fisicoculturistas, porque pues es población específica. Necesitas fisicoculturistas y necesitas financiamiento y necesitas que estos mismos fisicoculturistas accedan a que tú estés manipulando su entrenamiento y nutrición, lo cual lo vuelve un poquito complejo, aunque sí ha progresado bastante. The next question, okay, if you need to go, you just tell me, right?
Yeah, you're good. I'll let you know.
Sure, very well. Mini cuts, I think this question refers to mini cuts. Let's say about the recommendation of backing off from the surplus once you reach 15 to 25, 20, I guess it's body fat percentage, and do a deficit. I think it's in regards to mini cuts. Do you actually apply mini cuts? Do you think it's a good strategy?
I like mini cuts. I would rather, so in a perfect world, you're in a surplus for like 6 to 8 months, and then you do like a 8 week mini cut, and then you're back in the surplus, right? That would be ideal. Like you want to stay in surplus as long as possible. get in and out of your deficit because you're a higher body fat percentage, and then continue, with your growth, unless you're competing, right? So that's what I recommend mini cuts. But it stops being a mini cut at like 10 or 12 weeks. Then it's just a cut.
That's a longer cut at the point.
Yeah.
Sure. Nos comenta Brandon que, ok, quisieras mantenerte el mayor tiempo posible en un superávit, cosa de 6, 8 meses, y quizás sí sería buena idea después hacer un mini cut, no sé si alguien está familiarizado con el término, que sería un periodo corto en el cual eres un poco más agresivo con el déficit, pero él más bien recomendaría hacer un cut, un corte tal cual de unas 12 semanas, más o menos. We have a question that says, Hi Brandon, curious about what made you join INFS.
They asked me to, and I had time. I don't know. I like to participate in things and give back as much as I can. So it seemed like a responsible place.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, I just asked. Yeah.
Keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
Next question before we finish is bodybuilding and powerlifting, how compatible are they at a competitive level? I guess it's in regards to how can you mix being a competitive bodybuilder and a competitive powerlifter. What do you think about that?
I think if you want to be really good at either of them, just pick one. To mix them, I would say you're not going to compete very often in either one. So you may compete in powerlifting like twice a year and bodybuilding every 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer. It's possible. It's just not, the training has gotten so different now that it's not ideal anymore. At first, when people did it, people used to do it all the time, and it kind of works. But to be good at both of them, you need to focus on them, just like any other sport once you specialize,
Sure. Del culturismo y si el powerlifting, ¿qué tan compatibles son a nivel competitivo serio? Nos responde César, que saludos por cierto, hermano, que si quieres ser muy bueno en cualquiera de los dos, él te recomendaría dedicarte a uno. Porque, y básicamente si quisieras competir en culturismo, hacerlo con más tiempo, con más espacio, quizás cada 3 años, y en powerlifting lo pudieras hacer con un poco más de frecuencia, quizás cosa de 1 año. Antes las personas lo hacían más, seguro tú mismo, César, has visto que, por ejemplo, Arnold competía en powerlifting, en culturismo, pero como ha cambiado el entrenamiento y han cambiado también un poquito los estándares, pues ya es un poquito menos sustentable. Well, Brandon, I think we can finish it right now. I'm really, really grateful about having this opportunity to talk to you. I really learn a lot. I always do from you. I actually used the Instagram post you did about the flux diagram for the formulas with my own students. I'm a teacher, and I actually said, yeah, it was great. I'd never seen something like that before. That okay, this formula it was developed like this with this population. You can apply it like that, and it's a question that comes all the time. What's the best formula? So thanks for that, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that was fun. I always got asked that too, and I was like, I mean, I know which one I use, but I don't really know why it's the best. And so I was just like, all right, I gotta figure this out. So I spent like 3 weeks reading about it and made that post.
I can assure you, man, we were all really excited sharing it. And did you see the Brandon post? Yeah, I did. It's great. So really thankful for that one.
For sure.
So Brandon, I don't want to. No, I'm sorry. You go.
Oh no, I was gonna say thanks for having me. It's lots of fun to talk to you.
Well, I apologize in advance, like I told you, for my nervousness because I admire you quite a bit. So thank you very much for your time, Brandon. I don't know if you want to give people your next steps. Where can people find you? Something like that.
Yeah, so just follow me on Instagram. Most of my stuff is there. As you've seen, I've kind of pivoted off of Facebook,
Sure.
just because Instagram seems to be the place to be now. So that's where I'm at.
We're all hip now.
Yeah, I got to stay with the times.
Very well. I don't want to take any more of your time. I'm really grateful for this today, and I hope you have a really nice weekend, Brandon. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Daniel. Talk to you later.
Gracias a todos. que están en línea, nos despedimos de Brandon, espero les haya gustado. Si se me pasó alguna preguntita, ustedes disculparán, luego lo estoy moviendo por acá. Voy a terminar el live y ahorita en un ratito les comparto para que lo tengan disponible y lo chequen ya un poquito más a detalle. Gracias a todos que nos acompañaron. ¿Sabes? Saludos a todos, cuídense mucho.